What is going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk to you about SoFi. I want to go over some of the data points, break it down on what really moved in, go over everything else you need to know. But first, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up. And with that, let's get right to it. So SoFi had a pretty solid close to the week, went up 2.44%. After hours is going down slightly. A lot of uncertainty in the second half of today, but 1684 the low, 1752 the high. A lot of volume, so 91.6 million shares being traded, 64 is the average. When it comes down to today, you did have a certain level of FOMO continuing over from the last couple of days. Some relatively good data on a side note. Michigan consumer sentiment came in better than the forecast, and then also PCE month over month came in flat at 0.1, year over year 2.3 versus 2.2. So all in all, pretty good data. Of course, Powell did mention that he's going to be really looking at labor data rather than obviously inflationary data as a key driver for future cuts. So even though this is important to the market, wasn't really important to Powell this time around, in my opinion. But nonetheless, market really liked it alongside more clarity associated to tariffs. So I brought up in my video yesterday on how it was rather gray, how Trump just blatantly just said, hey, we signed a deal with China. We got some clarity this morning, so it looks as though it's 30% on China and they did 10% back. Pretty good. Market liked it. Of course, I think there needs to be some more ironing out, more additional details, but I think overall this is a pretty kick-ass deal for both countries. So I'm sure they're both going to walk away thinking it's a win. So that's kind of a good thing. Aside from that, though, what caused some volatility, this pullback right here, was Trump starting to talk about tariffs, more specifically Canada. So Canada is being difficult to deal with, and the states is going to be terminating all trade discussions with them and ultimately letting them know when what the rate is going to be in 7 days. So I don't know if this is more of a negotiation tactic, giving them 7 days to kind of reconsider, but nonetheless, market definitely did not like this whatsoever. So you saw a initial pullback, and then of course people started to buy the dip. No different than what happened last time. So of course, I think the whole Canadian tariffs is a big deal for some sectors, but a bigger picture, not so much in my opinion. So I think this is why you did see a little bit of a recovery from the sell-off. So aside from all that though, specific to SoFi, there wasn't any news, no fireside chats or anything, but over the last 5 days, it did go up 15.05%. And even looking at this chart, you barely see any pullback. So I think overall you're seeing a lot of FOMO. We are on the high end. As I've mentioned, SoFi does now like to trade between that $13 and $17 range. So we are on the high end. So essentially you could see a further push higher, but just be aware, just naturally it might get gravitated back down into kind of the $17 range. So I'm going to go over the technicals near the end of the video. But as far as shorts, they did return 203,000 shares. 13.58% of the free float is being shorted, works out to be 147 million shares overall are being shorted. Even looking at what they didn't really do all that much, despite it actually hitting that high of roughly like 750, that range. Yeah, things were honestly, it was a pretty good day, and I think based on the options, it was the best case scenario. So getting right to the options, today there was 58 million in calls, 14 million in puts. And again, I always like to bring up the sentiment, what the consensus was. And despite it running up 15% over the last 5 days alone, people are still very optimistic of more upside because 45% of all the options being done were bullish in nature. And you can kind of even see today there was 71 million in premiums, 35 the day prior, 24. So big money is definitely starting to look at SoFi and seeing a lot more upside. And you can kind of see from the bulls that there is a consensus for it to be roughly around that 1750 starting off going into next week. And then the bears are anticipating for it to be sub 16. So a little bit more downside based on this, but then again, maybe some of that was attributed to Trump kind of starting to talk about tariffs once again. But as I mentioned, this was the best case scenario. So with us closing above 17, that does mean that the $17 strike price and below is all in the money. That works out to be 158 1,000 in the money options. So ultimately that does work out to be 15.8 million shares that does need to be covered by market makers. Looking at the dark pool, you see a couple random transactions, so 1.29, 1.06, 2.03, but based on this, it does appear that big money and institutions have not started to cover those options. So market makers most likely will be doing that early next week, so you might see a very nice pump up first thing on Monday. Then again, after this video, they could still be covering, so maybe I'll cover that and touch on that during my weekend video. But aside from that, should make for a pretty good start to Monday. Aside from that, with it closing at 1718 above all the key fib levels on the classic, 1784 is going to be the next strong target, and then 1643 is that strong support, which was not even tested whatsoever today. So exciting times for SoFi. I know a lot of investors have been waiting a while for this nice breakout, but it goes to show that honestly you need to find good credible companies and just dollar cost average. So when this was looking like all hell was breaking loose and we were going down to like that $9 range in April, for those individuals that bought the dip, you are sitting pretty in a good position. So once again, let me know your general thoughts on that. But on the actual chart, the only negative I have to say, as I've mentioned over the last couple of videos, is the fact that it is overbought. But honestly, about 80 to 90% of all the stocks in the market right now are in a similar circumstance. So everything's overbought, meaning the first sign of weakness on a macro standpoint, you could see a little bit of a pullback. And I think this is why when Trump did kind of mention about the whole Canada tariff type of scenario, you saw this kind of overdone pullback. In my opinion, it's just because everything is overdone. So at the end of the day, going into next week, there's not really much negatives to really bring up aside from, like I said, being overbought. Today, there wasn't any new analyst ratings, so SoFi was just merely piggybacking off of the broader market and everything else. So let me know your thoughts on SoFi. Did you lock in some profits? Do you think that we're going to be seeing higher highs, like a new 52-week high and going into next week? What's your general 2 cents on SoFi? Don't forget to hit that thumbs up. Hopefully everyone has a good weekend. Stay tuned for my weekend video. And then as well, if you are looking for some solid buy signals, pop over to my Patreon and give buy signals on stocks, options, crypto. Definitely worthwhile to pop over there and take a look. With all that said, appreciate all of you watching.